Good. How are you?
Good, good. Okay. Do you want to give it another minute or two, or do you guys want to jump right into it?
I say go for it.
Okay, sweet. Well, awesome. First of all, thank you all for being here. Thank you for putting this together. Um, sorry Garrett couldn't make it, but we'll be seeing him soon, hopefully. And yeah, it's not going to stop us. We're going to keep going. I talked with Sarah last night, so we're off on the right foot. We've already had the chance to meet, have some good topics for us to talk about, kind of stuff that she's interested in. But yeah, so this is Sara Cudemo. Cudemo, how do you pronounce
Cudemo.
it? Cudemo. Okay, this is Sara Cudemo. She works at FedEx as a product manager. She was the business manager at the Daily Collegian and graduated in 2016. And yeah, she's here to talk to us today. So just a little background. If you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're doing now, and anything you want to share with us.
Sure. It's nice to talk with all of you guys. I was a marketing major at Penn State. I'm from outside of Philly, around Downingtown, if any of you are from around there, that side of the state. I majored in marketing, minored in international business. I studied abroad in Tokyo while I was at Penn State, and started in layout because we had a physical paper when I was there to put out every day. I was looking at my notes the other day. I think our circulation was like 10,000 when I was there. And yeah, I started in layout, became layout manager, and then was business manager my senior year. And since then, I joined a rotational program after college for Train Technologies, previously Ingersoll Rand, which is business to business manufacturing. And I was a product manager there, marketing. I was trying to decide what I wanted to do in the business world. And it was a great opportunity for me to move around different states, kind of see what else was outside of Pennsylvania and where I wanted to land. So I lived in Minnesota, which is where I'm based now. Moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, learned that was way too hot for me, and then moved back to Minnesota, where I've been about 6 years now. While I was at my last company, I was a product manager, commercialization manager, and business development and sales. So essentially, I was always working on similar things to what I did at the Collegian, which is how do you sell a product, show its value, price it accordingly, and work with cross-functional groups in order to come together and solve problems for customers. So that's also what I do at FedEx. I started as a commercialization manager, and now I'm a product manager in experimentation, which really means I'm in more consultative digital products where we're making customized solutions for Fortune 500 companies, our biggest customers, and how can we provide data to customers on their supply chain so that they can better understand and inform their decision making. So tend to have a lot of fun, and it's kind of a new problem every day. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. So I want to dive a little bit into your experience. You know, we went a little bit right off the bat about what you did at the Collegian, but what was that experience like for you? Like, what are some of the biggest things that you learned, especially as business manager?
Yeah, so I started spring of my freshman year, and I'd say the things that we all learn, whether you're on the news side or the business side, right away, right, is quick decision making, deadlines. The paper had to go out at a certain time, and if things were coming together last minute, we needed to come together and solve problems to get it out. So I think that was a big thing, as well as just how do we create awareness and student engagement with the paper, especially against competition, whether it's Onward State or other news media, other forms of entertainment, right? It's not just other newspapers that you're competing against. You're competing for students and faculty and people's time. So I think it was always trying to figure out, how do we break the mold? How do we get attention? How do we partner with other student groups? And I think a lot of it was just experimenting and trying to figure out what have we done in the past? What hasn't worked? How can we adapt and change from that? And I think that's a lot of the things I took when I was business manager, was trying to figure out how do we keep our goal at the time, I think, was really how do we keep the physical paper for as long as possible? Because at that time, a lot of college papers were only digital, and making that transition. And we knew it would come eventually, because that's just the nature of change and innovation. But it was our primary source of revenue at the time. We weren't making as much from digital ads. So we were trying to figure out and solve the problem of how do we translate our physical readers to online, and how do we make sure that we can also bundle pricing and get advertisers used to our digital online advertising, and what does that look like, and how do we share metrics and have that relationship with our customers, and how is that different than what we had before. So it was kind of a beginning of a new landscape that I think you guys are more entrenched in now, and more of what I'm used to in my work life, with digital and having data kind of your fingertips. But at the time, physical was more of our, I'd say, bread and butter.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a great point. It kind of leads into my next topic I want to discuss, which was, you were kind of on the forefront. It was 2016 at that point. So obviously the internet wasn't new. People had been there for a while, but when print is still your main source of revenue, what were you and your team doing to try and convince readers that it was worth reading digital, and that, making that switch? What did that look like for you and your team?
Yeah, so we messed with some various things. I think one was trying to create internal focus for our team on how to, like, previously I'd say, so when I started, a big thing that we did was we called them like paper pass outs, where our goal was to, like, each day, whether you were on the news staff or the business staff, they wanted you to, like, go pass out papers to really make sure our circulation stayed up. And sometimes I was even just like leaving them in a classroom and trying to get them, from the racks into people's hands. We were trying to figure out how do we do that from a digital standpoint, right? And that's pretty easy, right? Reshare, retweet, like, or X or whatever, at this point. And how do you really get that in your network? How do you create that word of mouth and things like that? So I think for my year, for better or worse, I think competitions are always hit or miss. I think you can design them sometimes incorrectly. So it's a little bit of a learning game of how do you incentivize the right behaviors without it missing the mark. But we did do, I think, some type of, if you want to think of it like Harry Potter, like Goblet of Fire, like competition, where we put the departments against each other. And basically there was points that you could win, like a house cup situation. And we were trying to you got rewarded for sharing news articles and doing certain things online, as well as physically, because that was still important to us. But we were trying to create that, like, learned behavior that you should, as either side of the division, but especially on the business side, you should be reading our partners' articles, and you should be sharing them with your friends. So those were some of the things we tried to do to just transition our team to get that kind of built externally, because I think you got to start at your core, right, before you can expect that of others.
Awesome. And, in your work previously in marketing and stuff like that, what is kind of one of the biggest tips you recommend in terms of marketing a brand like a college newspaper or building up that identity?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it starts with, first you got to decide who like are you as a brand, not to be too much of a marketer, but like if you were a person, right? Like, who is the Daily Collegian? But also, who's your target market, and what do you want to say to them? I think the benefit you have that we didn't really have at the time, and it actually makes me think a lot about, to make a maybe strange, I'll make this metaphor work, but like during the pandemic, Disney made most of its revenue from parks and in-person experiences, and then they went to Disney Plus, and that was a change in revenue model for them. But the benefit they had was they said, we're getting actually access to more data, on how our users are consuming our content and what they're interested in. And Disney's actually trying to like cut their costs and make less, but make more quality entertainment. So they're saying like Disney Plus, while it cost initially, is helping them inform their strategy. And I think that's important in understanding how are readers consuming your content, what are they interested in, who's coming back to what types of articles. And you can start to flesh out different personas of your readers. And I think understanding your target market can help you understand how your brand is resonating with them, right? Like an automatic persona I could think of is someone interested in sports, right? They might be the person that's only coming to the Collegian to read about the latest game or something like that. But there could be other people involved. And how do you parse out those groups? And are you a brand that wants to be everything to everyone? Or do you want to be niche and try to differentiate yourself from the competition? Because I think you also have to think of your brand in relation to others, right? And if your brand is the same as someone else, it doesn't resonate as much. So I think competition is incredibly important as well when you think about target market to build your brand.
Yeah, that you brought up a good point actually, that you want to differentiate yourself from your competition, which is something we have done pretty well. But there's something that comes to mind in that the taste of our target audience is a little different than our competition. I think when our competition is able to, in some ways, outperform us in that way, they have some of the stuff that they're looking for a little bit more. College students enjoy a little bit more content that's a little bit more like, what's the word? A little goofy, a little bit more fun, but we have built ourselves as a brand that is very serious journalism, and we pride ourselves in really doing like the best possible work that we can do. So I guess as a marketer and just as someone who has been in this kind of field, what are your ideas to convince students who may want to have like kind of like an easy news feed and stuff like that, that serious student journalism is worth their time?
I think so for me, it always comes back to consumer research. And like, I think in your instance, you might not have something that's readily available for your target people, right? How do you either persuade someone that's not reading you today or get more involvement and engagement from people that maybe are skimming things occasionally? And I think it's a balance of trying to figure out how to hook them in and what's interesting so that you can still give your product, essentially your, in this case, serious journalism. How do you feature that for them? And to me, I think it's understanding whether it's I feel like you can even do really scrappy surveys. I work at FedEx, so I have a lot of resources now, but my last company was manufacturing and we did everything as cheap as you possibly can. So I've done it both ways. And I think just having some like quantitative data to point you in a direction to understand what they're interested in, because in the world of entertainment and information, it's not a need, it's a want. So you do have to make sure that they want it. It's not, business to consumer is a finicky business compared to business to business. Business to business, at the end of the day, they are going to buy something. And you just want it to be your brand. In this instance, you need to convince them. And I think part of it as well kind of ties back to the brand. And I think connecting with people, the Collegian is the student newspaper, the history that it has as a newspaper, for the university, I think is really powerful. And I think part of it is telling that story outside of just a specific article. And how do you raise awareness within on campus? And partially in that regard, in that instance, I'd say look to competitors, which not in the newspaper field, but how are other clubs on campus, if you think of that, communicating to students on campus to join, to be aware, whether they're wanting donations or funding or whatever, how are they targeting students on campus to let them know about things? And you basically have to use other channels to get them to yours, right? So I think method is also important in understanding that research and how to bring people and share your story. If they're not currently reading you, you have to find out where they are.
Awesome. Sweet. All right. Well, coming it back, I guess circling back, you mentioned last night kind of having your collegiate experience was something big that was helpful in some of your earlier jobs. Can you explain a little bit what that was like for you on the business end, or even what you saw anywhere else within the collegiate? How did that aid you when you were entering the workforce?
Yeah, so I think when you go, it's important to enter, I think, any job opportunity or any opportunity as a learning experience and just keep your eyes open because you never know what you're going to pick up. Being in the Collegian when I was a product manager, while I was owning a product, I was usually just working with our marketing team on advertising and how we were communicating that externally and marketing that and what channels we were using. And a lot of times I'd be the one telling an agency what creative should look like for my product. And it reminded me a lot of what the creative department would do at the Collegian and working with our customers to create graphic designs and things like that. And the editing process that would go, usually the first one doesn't take, you have some thoughts, you go back and forth. So I think that was very applicable to, we did physical print, we did digital. And I think we were transitioning to digital while I was there at the time, as I mentioned. So a lot of it was, what channels are we using? Are we using PPC or SEO, pay-per-click or search engine optimization? Like what types of channels were we using? And so that resonated. I think it gave me a leg up in some regard because it didn't feel just net new. And then from the other side, I think I worked with sales directly. I was basically trying to train salespeople how to sell my product. As a product manager, you're typically what I call a wingman to sales or a subject matter expert. And they bring you in to kind of help close the deal or provide more information. And at the Collegian, when you're selling advertising, but also I feel like if you're part of the newspaper at all, as I mentioned with paper pass outs or whatever, you are an ambassador, and being able to cleanly say, this is the Daily Collegian, this is who we are, this is what we stand for any product, for any company, that's something you should be able to do. And those skills translate to just about anything. So those are just, I think, a couple things that really, I think, helped me, as well as just networking and seeing that cross-functional big picture. I think it's why I liked being business manager so much, but also why I like being a product manager. I like seeing across all the different business units. So, on the business side, we have sales, we have promotions or marketing. We have all the different aspects of how a business works. There's the finance perspective of how are we making money? How are we keeping the lights on? Top line, bottom line. So I think that to me gave me a great perspective how all the business, everything that I was learning in class, how does it all fit together to make one cohesive company? And I think that's really important to think about no matter what job you do, is how you fit in to the bigger picture. How is your company making money? How are you adding value and contributing to that? I think if you can always speak to that, to your manager, to your team, and show that value, you can continue to accelerate your career and make sure you're noticed.
That's great. There's something I want to expand on there, which is, kind of finding your purpose a little bit. Sometimes you might be in the same spot for a while, you kind of get into a groove. Even just on the Collegian, you find yourself in the same spot for a while. How do you know in your eyes when it's time to make a change? You jumped from different career paths. What does that look like? What are some of the notions that come into your head?
Yeah, it's a hard decision to make. I now outside of my rotational program, I think the longest role I was in was 2 years as a product manager for someone I worked for on rotation. And then I think generally it was year and a half ish. And I think for me, a thing that I noticed is I do get a little antsy. I get excited about learning. I like learning new things. I like working with new people. To me, that's a challenge. I think you have to understand what motivates you. And I realized for me, when I wasn't learning, or I felt like I felt like it wasn't adding to my career. Essentially, I was hitting a point where I was like, I'm doing the same thing over and over again. I'm not solving new problems. This is a skill set I collected, and now I'd like to collect something else. So I think that's important. And I think also keeping your eyes open and thinking about where you want to go next. Like, what other skills do you want to learn? Because that was partially why I moved from each role. It wasn't just to move. When I was a product manager, we didn't have a commercialization process at my company. And so I was given the opportunity to create one for our billion-dollar business. And that was really exciting for me as a marketer, where I knew conceptually how to do it. And they said, great, go do it. So that was a new mountain to climb. And then when I had the opportunity to work in sales, that was really scary to me because even at the Collegian, I didn't want to do sales. I can wingman the heck out of someone. I do not want to sell it myself. So that was something where that terrified me. But that's, I think, also important, is do things that scare you. The worst case is that you'll change jobs and move somewhere else. That's actually like the worst. Like it's not something that I think, if you don't go after things that scare you, I think you don't I find that reward. And it's why I studied abroad in Japan in college. Like, just do things, that short-term things that will get you somewhere else. And at least you'll learn what you don't like. So yeah, I think it's just those things to think about. And I think always the interpersonal connections, because I got all those opportunities while I worked really hard and I did my best. I had great managers that advocated for me. And I think that's important no matter where you work, is looking at who your manager is, and are they someone that will champion you, not just be a manager to you. And if they're not doing that for you, you need to find a champion somewhere else in the organization, because I feel like I created a brand for myself at my last company. I'm creating a new brand at FedEx, which is a little scary because I have to start over, but it's those people that, have told my manager, oh, someone told me you did a great job today. And, that's awesome. But it's that word of mouth, right? For the newspaper, for you personally, think of every interaction as an interview. Like, you shouldn't stop interviewing just because you got a job. And when you do that, I think you get offered jobs without applying. You basically have already interviewed. So some advice of things that I've learned.
That's a great point and a great segue into my next point, which we talked about this last night, which is a lot of us are seniors on this call. Next year or two, we'll all be looking for jobs. So you talked about finding ways to differentiate yourself. You made a great example about, being one marketer in a class of 800 in a class of the entire country, and you were able to differentiate yourself. So what are some of the ways that we can be thinking about just finding ways to stand out, to be better?
Yeah, I'd say always go the extra mile and do the things that I think there's things that Penn State tells you and you're like, oh, everyone does them, so I'll just still be one of the many. Like, cover letters, people our age don't do them as often, I've learned. So if you actually do a cover letter and take the time, even if you can have a template cover letter and generally swap out very minor things to the company, but it shows the effort. I will say, check on the online application that you can upload a cover letter before you do it, because that would suck. But that I think my actually current director gave me this advice because when I was applying to FedEx, I mean, it's a mammoth company, and I'm in FedEx DataWorks, but I wasn't sure. FedEx loves giving everyone like generally the same job title. I'm a product manager lead. Someone else is a product manager lead. You wouldn't know which product we're involved with from our titles, so it's a little hard. But that's not the case in like most companies. There is some qualifier of what portfolio they're in or something like that. Go on LinkedIn and message them when you apply for a job and say, hey, or even before, and say, whether it's the hiring manager or not, even if it's people at the individual contributor level. Like I talked to someone today and she was like, hey, I just want to hear about like FedEx DataWorks and how you're enjoying your MBA. And what was that? Is that something I'm thinking about? That's something I might want to do. Like, tell me more. People are willing to talk to you. And worst case, they will not respond. Like that is the worst case scenario. And that's not a bad case scenario. But those people then could put in a good word for you, tell their manager, hey, I talked to someone that seems good. The whole goal, I'd say, in this process is to get to an interview. Because I think everyone at the Collegian has the skills, and Penn State has given us the credibility to win that job. You just have to get in the consideration set. So it's just how do you break through the noise of everyone else. And I will say, like, the career fair also was a win. I did apply for things and get interviews and job offers outside of the career fair, but for me personally, it was a great opportunity because these are companies specifically coming to Penn State to look for recruits. So in their mind, they want to hire people. So I'd say don't sleep on that. Look at who's going, make a list of any companies that you might be interested in. Maybe go to a couple that you don't want to work for just to get the nerves out, and then go to the ones you really want to talk to. But yeah, don't be afraid to just put yourself out there. And it's in the Smale College of Business, but I don't know if journalism does this, but once you get to the interview, like ask someone to prep you if you're not super familiar. Like everyone still does the like STAR method and everything. Like that's legit. Behavioral questions rule the day of interviews, and if you can knock those out with you can pre-can, I'd say a lot of problems you have solved at the Collegian will get you those answers. Like I think like 75% of behavioral questions I answered in interviews were related to the Collegian, and people would tell me in the interview, like, that is a great scenario because we basically have work experience that we can show that a lot of other students can't. They talk about conceptual, or they're talking about a case competition that they were in. We get to talk about business problems. So I think as much as you can bring up the Collegian, I'd say just think on some problems that you solved and look up some generic behavioral questions. And usually you can repurpose those scenarios for just about anything.
Awesome. I want to bring it back to my favorite social platform, LinkedIn. A big thing actually we talked about last night was how you present yourself kind of anywhere. What are some, because, social media is a big thing nowadays, and, everyone can post anything they want. But when it comes to creating a digital footprint that is advantageous to you, what are some of the things students should be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to, I don't know how headshots matter these days much. I feel like Penn State the Smale Business School scared us a lot, I think, on like having a professional photo. I think it's gone in and out, where I think sometimes we're in a space where actually having more real photo is preferred. So I think it really just depends on your industry. But I feel like if you're in business, I get so many headshots, so I might as well, I generally use them. But I'd say having a photo that at least you put effort into putting in your experience. I think on LinkedIn, some people don't put in under their job, like their title of, if you've had internships or the Collegian, like take the time to put in details and descriptions of like things you did. Some people don't. I get it if they like have work experience like prior to LinkedIn, like that'd probably be super annoying, but you guys are starting fresh, put that in there. I can't tell you how many recruiters reach out to me, and I feel like it's because I have basically a lot of my resume on my LinkedIn. So when they're searching for certain criteria or things, whether it's after college or later, that gives them, you will pop up if they're looking for someone like you. So take the extra couple minutes and fill that out. I also think it's really important to ask people for, I don't know, I want to say recommendations. I don't know if that's what the feature's called specifically on LinkedIn, but you can have people recommend you for your skills and, give scenarios of, how you were great at something. I think I was at my last company for so long, I don't think I have a ton from them, but in college for internships, I think I asked every manager I worked for at the time, at the end of the internship, they'd be like, oh, you did so great. And I'd be like, do you mind putting that on my LinkedIn? So it's just things like that you can do, and connect with people at the Collegian, connect with anyone you work with at internships or jobs. And as I said, proactively reach out to people that are in fields you're interested in and say, hi, I'm a Penn State student. I'd really like to talk to you and learn about your career. And I think your company and your culture. And I want to, it's something I'm interested in. And usually you can get a connection out of that. So if you go to apply, now you have someone, in the network that you can connect with. So I'd say those are just a couple things. And then obviously sharing and engaging with content, especially if you're in journalism. I feel like I was on the business side, but I wrote things at my last company for content so that we were in transportation and food and safety and pharmaceuticals and regulations. So I would write content for various, I'd say, trade publications. And obviously I'm going to reshare that on my LinkedIn when I write it. So just things to be thoughtful of, so that when people pull up on your LinkedIn, they're seeing your work history, what you have been involved in, reshared recently. And I think that's primarily what I'd recommend. And then obviously your about section, probably highlight what types of jobs you're looking for. Kind of like the header of what you'd put on a resume coming out of college is, I'm a journalist major interested in working at XYZ, right?
Awesome. I have one more question and then we'll open it up to the audience. That was my question. Just kidding. What is your one bit of advice to anyone who goes through the Collegian?
I'd say, that's hard. Don't blink because it goes by really fast. But also I think take moments to learn what other people are doing outside your specific group, whether if you're a writer and you're in sports, like talk to someone else that does a different beat, or if you're in the business side and you're in promotions, learn more about what the other groups are doing. And again, you never know when that information is going to be helpful. But that's something I feel like that making those connections and understanding what other people are doing, I think it's important to have empathy for anyone you work with and the challenges that they're coming across. And sometimes you can actually help your teammates solve problems outside your department or provide a different perspective. And I'm a product manager, so I'm big into collaboration. So I think just breaking down those silos, as well as across the news to business side, how are you learning about what journalists are dealing with, and journalists learning about the business challenges we're having of selling the paper. And I think it's really important to talk to each other and communicate, because you never know that someone else might have a great idea to solve a problem. Because I personally love brainstorming. So I feel like I like things with large groups and getting people involved. So I think just talking to each other is also just great for networking and learning something new, but you never know what you'll find.
Awesome. Well, that's all my questions. So if anyone wants to butt in, has anything they want to ask, now's your chance.
Hey, Sarah. My name is Luke Vargas. So I'm the current business manager. So it's really great to have you here. And you've said so many insightful things, speaking to obviously all of our experiences across the Collegian, but obviously very much to me, because you sat in my seat and so much of what you're saying is so similar and exactly just these general themes are exactly what we're dealing with now. These are sort of perpetual things that will always be, what we're in contest with. And so I want to go back to what you said a little bit earlier. I have a question about, and obviously I'm sure you have a lot of hindsight now and looking at the situation, print has obviously decreased. We're not daily anymore, we're weekly. And, I think in a lot of ways, we all anticipate that print probably isn't going to be around for much longer. I'd be surprised if we did have print in 5 years, just because of all the different projects we're starting on constantly and all the different avenues we're being pulled in. And, but we are starting so many new things, and things seem to come and go so quickly now. It feels like Twitter's sort of coming out the door, and another social platform might come into popularity, or a different style or a different medium. How would you gauge that? I think we want to be in the moment. We want to be present. We want to put our energy towards something that's going to have lasting value to all of us. From that leadership standpoint, how do you assess situations like that? How do you assess what direction to head in? Or do I, dig my heels in now and stand on this stand right here and really hammer down where I am?
You're hitting on one of the themes that I feel like comes up with product management all the time, which is prioritization. Like the question of how do I have this strategy, I have my goals, but I have this huge backlog of all these things I want to do, and how do I make those decisions of what's important? And I think I was at a conference once and someone said, I think you want to make, so I'll leverage from her, I'd say big bets and small wins. So look at some things that might take some time. They might take more resources of either your team or money to build, but they could have a huge payoff. And it's something that you think is worth investing those times in. I'd say in those instances, doing small experiments or things are also helpful to increase your confidence that that is worth the time. But then there's small things that might not take up a lot of resources that just send it. Like, just do it. The worst case is that it doesn't work out, but it has the opportunity for you to learn from it and grow. So I'd say usually you want to try to do, like, I think half or a little more than half of like small wins, and then kind of less big bets, right? Because they take up a little more time and resources. So you want to kind of have that flexibility. And then I'm also just going to pull from, so Agile, if in the tech space at FedEx is pretty big, but I think when people think of it or hear of it, they think of like IT. Actually, what's I think I like most about it is it's representative of any trend or thing you hear. It starts in one industry or one segment, but it could be applicable to other things. So for example, Agile is really applicable in the business world or anything outside of IT. It's really just about my next 2, 4, 6 weeks, depending on where you are, that's how you're breaking down your time. And you're basically saying, here's my backlog of things I want to do. And it's maybe like 10 things, like updating a website. I will not have enough time or money to update all the 10 things on the website at the same time. So I'm going to pick, the 3 things that I think are most important. And I'm going to do those over the next 6 weeks. And then at the end of 6 weeks, I'm going to do a retrospective and say, how valuable was that? And I'm going to take what I learned and then I'm going to apply it to 2 or 3 more things in the next 6 weeks. And I think time at the Collegian goes so quickly between fall and spring, and then all of a sudden it's over. I think it's important to build in those blocks and those checkpoints to also look back and say, do I want to keep moving forward with my strategy, or do I want to change and pivot? Because you should never fear the pivot. I think it's really important to just lean in and change your mind, because you still learn something, and then you'll take that onto something else.
I want to ask you about leadership. I think that we talked a lot about this with our last guest, and you're in this role, and you know what it's like. I mean, I guess everyone here knows what it's like to come through as a student and then all of a sudden to be in a certain role, and you're all of a sudden the leader of your peers. And I really want to I feel like there's not enough conversation about this, or succession planning, or talking about what that feels like, and really kind of what's behind the curtain when it comes to being in leadership. Talk to us a little bit about your transition into being a business manager, and sort of the feelings and the thoughts behind that, in that emotional situation. And also talk about great leaders in your professional life, who's really succeeding, and what traits make a great leader in that professional space as opposed to the collegiate space.
Yeah, I think it's the transition is weird. It's just weird is what it is, but it's also thrilling. I think it's important to create an environment where you are with your peers. At the end of the day, a lot of you came up together, and keeping an open environment of, this is what I'm thinking, getting feedback. I've had leaders where we had gate reviews. So it's like you're presenting for funding or something like that. And at the end, VPs or leaders, like this president, has to sign off. Usually the highest ranking person in the room would go last, because they didn't want to intimidate the VPs into just following what the president or highest person wanted to do. So I think that's also an interesting concept of throwing something out there, not giving your opinion, and really pushing your team to weigh in, so it's unbiased by your opinion. And then I think the things I find again and again of leaders that I like are, one, flexible and like willing to change their mind. There's nothing scarier, or I guess the reason you won't be open with someone is if you're like, well, what I say won't change your mind, or you've decided already, right? So I think making sure that your team knows you're willing to listen and have that flexibility, I think you're going to get more feedback to make good decisions for the team. And also just raising people up. I think that my favorite thing personally that I like to do, as well as I like to see like that other people do for me, is calling people out when they do something so great and sharing that with the team, whether it's their division, the wider group, but sharing that type of success and what they did, I think encourages other people that see it, right? Oh, if I do something good, I'll also get that visibility. And I think that type of thing always excites me and motivates me, of just good reinforcement of people doing great things, which they do all the time at the Collegian. So sometimes you can blink so fast, but I think that's important to take moments and say, who did something great today or this week, and highlighting that. At work, for me, I'm remote with FedEx because I'm in Minneapolis and everyone's in Memphis. But for us, that's Slack or on Teams. People will like call out someone and give them kudos or something like that. And I think it's just kind of nice to be like, okay, I worked hard, but people noticed.
Oh man, I think one thing I've noticed, and I'm sure everyone here, this is probably relatable. When you're younger, every year comes with so much change and so much growth, and it becomes very visible, and you can point back to the smallest incident and it had the most profound effect on your life, I guess. Like every little moment that you got in trouble as a kid ultimately led to a higher lesson. And as you get older, it feels like these moments become more opaque and less clear, and growth becomes much less visible to us. And so I really love to ask people how they grew in the last year, or maybe what was a pivotal moment of growth in your life, professionally or interpersonally, that you'd be willing to share with us. I think it really helps to hear someone else's perspective on their own lives, and it ultimately opens us up to be able to see where we've learned or where we've grown without even truly noticing it, except in hindsight or in retrospect.
Yeah, I feel like it's been accelerated since I've been at FedEx. DataWorks is only, I'd say, 2 years old or so as a business unit. Pretty rare for a big company to like create a new division. So we're kind of like think of us as a startup with like a huge venture capital backer, essentially. So things move fast. I started in April in the middle of a field sales pilot. They were piloting a new digital product, and I jumped right in. It finished in May, end of May. We presented the results to leadership, and they said, "Okay, can you roll it out next week to thousands of salespeople?" And I was like, please hold. Like, I just came from an organization that was process heavy, and we would plan product launches or something new, unveiling a new communication. Like if you were going to launch a new newsletter at the Collegian or something else, right? How much planning would you do in advance? At my last company, it would be 4 to 6 months minimum, with sales enablement, marketing, pricing, all these different things you have to do, customer service to make sure if someone called about the product that they can get support, like all these things that come up. And they were like, can you do that next week? And we got together and said, what's actually possible? And I was like, well, we can reuse some things from the field sales pilot, and we can get some other things, and we can bootstrap this together. My manager said, what is it going to take? And I was like, 2 weeks. We can do it in 2 weeks. So we had the communication go out on like June 14th. We had a sales training set up the over the next 2 weeks, so that by the end of June, and then we did another wave in August. So I've trained, I'd say 1,500 sales execs. 1,000 have taken an e-learning that we created in parallel. We created a new video through an agency because we didn't have the time to do it ourselves. Like, you just have to find out, like, we didn't have the internal resources to do it. So I said, you're going to have to spend some money is what is going to happen. Right. I think there's that triangle they say where it's time, people, money. Like, you can't have all three. I was like, we can do it, but it's going to cost. So we, within 2 weeks, were able to announce within 30 days, it was rolled out. And it was the fastest I've ever furiously done something, but I was able to pull on all of the skills I had for 7 years prior of doing it, maybe the nice way, the way you'd prefer to do it. But also that challenged me. And at the end of the day, I realized I can do it. I don't think I'd like to do it again, but I think it's important to not say no and figure out, instead of saying no, you come back with, we can't do that. I can do this. And I'd say every project you're going to get in your life is a negotiation of what's feasible and what you're willing to give up and what you want to get. And I think framing it that way shows that you're a problem solver in your organization, rather than a blocker.
Oh man, I love that. That's an incredible lesson. First off, that's a brilliant story, and definitely something. Oh man, we're doing so many new things right now, and I think that's so relatable in a lot of ways, or at least that sentiment. But no, that was an incredible story. I love that attitude. That attitude is so core and essential to being productive and being a team player and being an asset in a workspace. And ultimately, that's a selfless attitude. It requires more work, and it requires you to stretch yourself. So yeah, talk to us a little bit about, are there any more moments of challenge that you faced at the Daily Collegian? Were there a moment where you felt like you needed to say yes to something, or maybe you did say yes on an off chance, and maybe in any other situation would have said no? Yeah, can you speak to that attitude a little bit more in your college experience?
Yeah, I think at the Collegian, I mean, speaking back to this is harking back to your question on like peers and things like that, but I definitely, I feel like still today, but back then especially, imposter syndrome was real for me. And I felt like I had this title and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I also think I had this feeling that when I was an adult, like a professional, that I'd also know what I was doing. 6 months ago when I was launching that thing for FedEx, I didn't know what I was doing. You just make it up as you go along. It doesn't quite change. But it's the attitude of how you approach it, right? And I think for us, some of the things were, I mean, sometimes it was just deadlines or customers and trying to get things in maybe what I'd call unreasonable timeframes. And I think this is something I'm used to when I was at my last company. There's a balance of the customer's always right. And also you want their business. You want to retain their business, especially when loyalty is so important, right? It's not just one win or sale, it's future sales. So I think sometimes I face pressure to say yes to something outside of our normal deadlines, or pressure on price because they were saying, well, if I buy more, can I get a lower price? And it's kind of hard to, and sometimes you're like looking in their face and you're like, oh God, like do I have to make this call right now? And I think sometimes giving yourself the grace as well to say, what I've learned in sales is you can always say, let me follow up with you. No one's actually mad in the moment. If you say, I need to check some facts, I need to check some numbers, I can follow up with you. Pick a date that you can meet the deadline. If you don't, then they have a right to be pissed. But I think sometimes people create this urgency and pressure to try to force people to make decisions that are beneficial to them. And I think you always have to remind yourself that you actually have power to reframe your position. If you don't feel like you're in a power position, it's someone trying to dominate and get in a power position. So I think as a student, we're not used to, we're still kind of growing and learning, right, who you are. And I think you have to remind yourself that you guys are all capable people, and you are business manager, you are salespeople, you're journalists, and you have a right to be wherever you are and make great decisions. So
Awesome. Well, that brings us to 2 minutes. Any final questions? Okay. This has been great. Thank you so much for your time. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot else to say other than that. This was really fun. We really enjoy you coming in tonight. I'm glad I got the chance to meet you last night. Glad we all got the chance to meet you tonight. A lot of great lessons to look at. A lot of great stuff to take forward with us as we go through the rest of this year. In a time that is very uncertain for the Collegian, you brought a lot of wisdom for us to really bite into and move this place forward. So that does not go unnoticed. Thank you so much for everything. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your night.
thanks everyone. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or reach out if you ever come across any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. That was great. Thank you, Luke and Nick. That was really good. You guys did a good job.
Thanks, Barb. Hey, RJ, Barbara, Emma, have a great night.
You too.
Great.